Okay, Exodus chapter 24, beginning in verse 1. Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words which the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the sons of Israel. They offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, "Behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel, and they beheld God, and they ate and drank. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." So Moses arose with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. But to the elders he said, "Wait here for us until we return to you, and behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, let him approach them." Then Moses went up to the mountain in the cloud, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And to the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. And Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went up to the mountains. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so this is the ratifying of the covenant that began all the way back in Exodus chapter 20. So, let's see. First of all, let's go back to verse 1, and I just log these names away because it's going to be so fascinating when we get to the golden calf chapter. You just have to notice who's going up. Then he said to Moses, so God has set apart Moses to be the mediator. Just make note, God chose Moses to be the mediator. Moses didn't pick himself. God chose Moses to be the mediator. And he tells him to come up to the Lord, you and Aaron. And we don't have the priesthood established yet, but we will. And Aaron is going to be the high priest when we start the tabernacle. And then Nadab and Abihu are his 2 oldest sons. And I'm just going to throw this in now. His 2 sons were killed in Leviticus chapter 10 because they offered strange fire. So just make note that they're part of this group that went up the mountain and actually saw the Lord.
And God chose them.
God chose
them.
As
Moses.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, he set apart Aaron to be the priesthood, all by his design, absolutely. And so those are, Aaron has 4 sons, and these are the 2 oldest. And then also 70 of the elders of Israel. So you've got Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and then 70 elders. And just notice, we're going to see the word worship a lot. Just notice what worship looks like in this chapter and also in Hebrews. I just think it's interesting. And notice they're going to worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord. So again, God has set Moses apart. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him. And we're going to keep seeing Moses come up the mountain. So it looks like it's like a gradual ascent. It's just gradually, just going little bits at a time. Then Moses, let's see. I'll just say it here. Like when I've heard this taught, it's like this is what our tabernacle picture looks like, but on a different, like you had the outer court where actually, let me kind of see your picture. I don't have a picture. And the people were on the outside around the tabernacle. The priest worked in here, and then the high priest alone. So you kind of have those degrees of distance. So the people are still out here. Then you have the 70 elders, Nadab, Abihu, and Aaron. And then you have Moses actually as the mediator, ascending the closest. So it's just kind of interesting how that worked. Okay. Verse 3, Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord has spoken we will do. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. So at this point, Moses is down. He's at the foot of the mountain. He's with the people. And it's just so interesting because I went back and read, and we can look at it together in Exodus 19. I don't think I put it in your notes. But just...
Did he have help building?
Well,
Moses did?
no, he just built this altar, but it was... if you'll remember at the end of 20, he gave very clear directions how to build it. And I'm sure he had help with those big heavy stones because he's like 80 now. And I'm sure he had help with the stones. I don't know. It just doesn't say. But if you'll remember back in 19, there was thunder, there was lightning. If anyone came near, touched the mountain, they would die. If something touched the mountain, they had to stone it to death because they couldn't cut. I mean, it was just such a... And then now, it's just a different... Post-covenant, it's going to be a very different approach to the mountain. It's still holy, don't get me wrong. It's still very, very, very holy. But I just thought it was interesting, the contrast. So Moses sets up this altar at the foot of the mountain. And the 12 pillars, or the way it was described in one of the commentaries, there would have been like tall stones, pillars or stones, and they 12 of them to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And this too is a picture, and so when we do this covenant, the altar is going to represent God in the covenant making. And then the stones represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is like the same picture you're going to see all throughout the Old Testament, or especially the wilderness. They're traveling. You've got the tabernacle in the middle and the 12 tribes around it. And it's just God dwelling among his people. Just a consistent picture we get.
Hey, Dawn.
Yes.
When you were reading it, and it talked about the 70 elders,
Mm-hmm.
because it dawned on me that that's exactly how many people came up to Egypt.
Yes, when they came out of Egypt, they started out a family of 70.
And that number keeps popping up like the 12 tribes. There's always 70.
Yes.
And I thought, well, that's pretty cool.
That is thanks for pointing that out. Yes, there were 70. There were a family of 70 when they came into Egypt. And now we have 70 elders. So I don't know if they're representative from each family. I don't know. I don't know how they...
I just thought that was a neat
It's very,
number.
very interesting.
Were
Very
those
interesting.
The ones that
that's what I was thinking.
Moses appointed 70 to help him with the judgment. Is it the same group?
I mean, I'm going to assume,
Or is that later?
yes. I don't... Well, he did that, like, his father-in-law
His
came in
father-in-law
chapter
told
18.
him,
Yeah. So I'm going to assume...
Moses picked the 70 or God picked the 70?
It's in chapter 18.
Oh, okay. Well, I can go back. And
Moses and people selected their
And Jethro. Yeah, you're right. The tribes, it was a patriarchal type, and they had some like over bigger, and then some over 10s, some over hundreds. I can't remember the exact numbers. But anyway, he broke it down then, so you're right. They could have been some of those.
The family hierarchy was such a big deal back then.
It was
wouldn't
huge.
really been too hard to divide that up and pull your leaders out.
Yes, yes. Very different than what we have today. It would have been very
No elections.
natural. Yeah, yeah. No, thank goodness, no. No one
Probably
campaigned
like
for this.
Other cultures, maybe, in
Yeah.
their families or so.
Yes, very, yeah, very patriarchal. Okay, and then in verse 5, and he sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. Have no idea. They don't have the priesthood yet. We know once we set up the priesthood, it will only be the priest offering these. Here it's the young men of the sons of Israel.
Okay, and the peace offering means just what it says?
Yes,
That's
you're
what
at
I
peace.
thought.
You only, right, it's a celebration of being at peace with God.
This, Holman uses the word fellowship.
Yes,
always.
fellowship, yes. Yes, that's a very good word, yeah. Fellowship offering. Okay, and then, so when they sacrifice these animals, they would drain the blood. And so they put half of it in basins, and then the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So this sprinkling of blood, in Genesis chapter 15, we looked at the covenant between Abraham and God. And Abraham was actually asleep, and they took the animals and they cut them in half. All covenants were ratified in blood. So you and I, we sign a contract. And until that contract's signed, it means nothing. But once we sign it, we agree to all the terms, and then it's binding. It's legally binding once we sign it. Well, this is legally binding once the blood has been shed and sprinkled. And like I know with the one with Abraham, it's like saying, if I don't keep my end of the covenant, what happens to these animals may happen to me if I don't keep my covenant. It's very serious, very binding, and you don't enter into these lightly.
Don, is this sprinkling? Is this where some religions get the
Yes,
idea?
I think it is. I really do. I think it is.
For sprinkling like,
Like baptism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder, did he touch all the people? He couldn't have.
Well, some commentaries said he did the rocks to represent the people, and others said no, the people, maybe those like the elders or those closest would have been splattered. But it's a way of saying, if we don't, we'll die like this animal if we don't keep our end of the covenant.
Mhm.
Which they were, no.
We don't.
Yeah, yeah. We know how the story ends. So notice he sprinkled the altar first, so God's like the initiator of the covenant, and then when the people hear it, they agree, then they're sprinkled, and just saying, if we don't keep our end of the covenant, maybe die the way the animals died.
So question.
Yes.
This is off topic, but because we're talking about the covenant, and I know when you have the covenant, you swap firstborn sons. And so Israel was in the desert for a generation.
Mhm.
So would they not have lost their firstborn sons possibly? Or the firstborn sons maybe went into the promised land?
No one how does it work? No one of the generation that entered the wilderness left the wilderness except for Caleb and Joshua.
Okay, so it would have been the next
Yes,
generations.
generations.
So that would have been the
That's-
first generation
Okay.
after coming out
Yeah.
of the sin of Egypt,
That's
maybe? I don't know. It was just a thought.
yeah. No.
I don't know anything about swapping sons. What's that?
Well, the redemption of your firstborn, and that's in chapter 13, Exodus 13.
Dedication.
Yeah.
They swapped.
They became gods.
Well, okay, but here was the thing. All of the firstborn of Egypt died. Now you're asking me to go back in my memory. But
no,
all of
I'm
the
just-
firstborn of Egypt died. And so, I can't remember how it all worked. But the idea was, instead of taking the firstborn of Israel, God accepted a lamb in their stead.
Okay.
And we're going to see even the priesthood, he's going to accept all the Levites in the
Okay.
place of the firstborn.
Okay.
It's an
Gotcha.
exchange. Yeah. I read this and I thought this was interesting about there were 4 aspects to a covenant. The first one they called a preamble, which you would have the initiator, and he would introduce himself and then identify. Well, I think just that part, he'll identify himself. So I was looking back at Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. Okay, I don't think I put it in your notes, but Exodus 20, verse 1. Actually, it's 20, verse 2. So God identified himself. He says, I am the Lord your God, which would have been the first. So the initiator identifies himself in the covenant. And then he would identify the relationship he has. It's like the greater and the lesser. So the greater would initiate the covenant and then identify his relationship. So he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So that would be the beginning parts of a covenant. And then you set out the terms and conditions. And we saw last week the if-then. If you do all of this, then I will do that. And we saw that clearly last week, the if-then. So God is bound to do these things. What did he say? It's in 23:22. If you will truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I'll be an enemy to your enemies, adversary to your adversaries. I will destroy the Perizzites and et cetera, the Canaanites. Anyway, all the if-thens are set out. And then the last part of the covenant is the ratifying. So what we would say is the signature, the sealing. And so that's what we have here, the ratifying or the confirming of the covenant. It always required a blood sacrifice. And then with the blood being divided, it's representing the 2 different parties. So God and then the people. So it was divided in half. And God's going to keep his end, but he's only bound to, do away with sickness. He's only bound to do that if they obey, which is why you see the plagues. Right, when they disobey, he uses plagues.
There are two different kinds of covenants. Like there's the if then, and then there's obviously the cross, which is
Right. And
based on
Abraham.
him, not on us.
Well, see, that's how Abraham's covenant was. So I went back and I redid.
What are they called? What are the two? Are they?
I don't know if they're called 2 different ones, but I did go back and read Galatians with this in mind, and it's so intriguing. So there's always been a covenant of promise, and the Abrahamic covenant never expires.
Right.
But we see the new covenant replaces this one only. So we have an unconditional covenant replacing a conditional one. So it's kind of cool. But there's always been a covenant of promise.
Yes.
So I went back and read Galatians with that in
So
mind.
now
It's
we don't
something-
have the if then.
No. And that's what we said last week. You can't go around if someone's sick say, oh, well, it's because you didn't obey the Lord. Because that's so Old Testament, Old Covenant. We never.
Just in my Bible study on Sunday night, we were talking about that. We're like, you can't, like we're talking about how you have to understand the author and who they were writing to, because then you can easily take, especially like you said, the Old Testament, and start applying some of those things to people today, and that's how you get all sorts of crazy.
Yes, you can't do that. You can't do that. Which, I mean, it's I don't know, you can make someone mad when you talk about the positive things, but then when you look at it with the negatives, then you can see how awful that it is, positive or negative. You can't pluck something out of its context and apply it somewhere else. You can't do that.
But it is if you receive Jesus as a personal relationship, then you will have eternal life or life more abundant. There is an if then,
all who
Sort of,
believe.
But
Right.
it's all dependent on him and your accepting
Exactly. What does it say? Whosoever believes in him. So it's for whosoever believes in him, but it's only for those who believe in him.
Right.
So, yeah, I can see. Okay. Okay. Let me go ahead and finish out just hitting the highlights of this. So the people agreed, we will be obedient. And this is including everything from chapter 20 all the way through what we talked about last week through chapter 23. Yeah, 23. So they're obligated themselves to obey. And this is a conditional covenant. It is conditional. It's based on works. So Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "Behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And under his feet there appeared to be pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel. And they beheld God, and they ate, and they drank. I forgot to mention that in our covenant, that there's a covenant meal. And it would be a fellowship meal, a peace meal. And this is what you would protect. So when they had a fellowship offering, they would bring it, and they would share in the meal with the priest as a picture of fellowshipping with God. And so here they're actually... we know they didn't go too near. They're still at a distance, but they're able to see and not die. And he makes it a point to point that out.
My Bible says that they didn't see him in his fullness. What does that mean? Do you know?
I mean, you know how Moses wasn't even allowed to see his full glory.
No one was.
I think they would have died had
That's
they
what I
seen.
thought,
But they were able to
wonder what
see
they saw.
enough to know they saw God. And then we see the appearance, the sapphire, which they said, I guess the sapphire is only second in luster to an actual diamond. It's just, yeah, go.
Other translations say blue lapis lazuli.
Yeah.
Anyways, and I had to do this for another lesson, and I looked it up. I don't know if you've seen what it looks like, but it's like a dark blue stone with like speckles of gold all throughout it. It looks so much like the night sky, you know? It's like, and then I can't remember where it was, but it's in Revelation, I think.
Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10. Ezekiel saw the same thing.
He saw the same thing.
Yeah, and
God standing on the same.
they said it was so sparkly is the only word I could think of, but the luster, the sparkle was just second to only the diamond. It would have been amazing. And yeah, it's just interesting that that's the way Ezekiel described it also.
I was surprised to read the word pavement.
Yes, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that. You're right. To be a pavement of sapphire. Yeah, they're just walking on. Yeah. Huh. Okay, and then, but make note, they have a fellowship meal.
Is that the fourth part of the covenant?
That would be the fifth. I forgot to put that part. Like number 5. Yeah, it's a fellowship meal, and that was very common. We see it like with Melchizedek. We've seen it all throughout Genesis when we did it. Okay, they ate and they drank. But notice not until they were in covenant, not until they confirmed the covenant. They were in covenant relationship at that point. Which to me, that changed the tone of the mountain. It changed the fellowship, everything, because they were in covenant with God. Verse 12. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandment which I have written for their instruction." Again, we're reminded this isn't Moses making up the law as he goes. This is truly given by God. It's God's law. And the people have willingly submitted themselves to the authority of God and his word. They've officially become a theocracy, if you will, and agreed to the law of God to submit to that. So Moses arose with Joshua. Now, we saw Joshua show up in Exodus chapter 17 when they were fighting the Amalekites. And then we also see her here. And we saw both of them in 17 when they were fighting the Amalekites, because Joshua was actually fighting the Amalekites, but Moses was up on the mountain. He kept his arms lifted so they could win, and Aaron was on one side and Hur on the other. And so here they are again. So Moses arose with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. But to the elders he said, "Wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, let him approach them." So Moses, we know from the end of the chapter, he's going to be gone 40 days and 40 nights. He leaves Aaron and Hur in charge. But please note that they've seen they witnessed this. They saw the pavement of sapphire. And, okay. And then he leaves them in charge if there's a legal matter, because now they have the law, they've established their layers of judgment, if you will, I guess. And the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And on the 7th day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. And again, it's God calling Moses. And this is interesting. So, one, we see it, the cloud and on the mountain, but then in the eyes of the sons of Israel, all they can see is this mountain, and the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire. So we had the cloud fire thing again, and they saw consuming fire.
Did they realize what that fire was or represented?
I mean, I'm
if you saw a fire on a mountain, you would think something was consumed.
Terribly wrong.
Yes.
Yes. But just because they've been traveling with the cloud
And the fire.
for the last 50 days, I mean, I think they knew.
I think they did.
But then whenever we see them act a fool and build a golden calf, I don't know if they just start thinking, gosh, it's been so long. He's been in that fire for 40 days. I guess he's not coming back. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I don't know. And Moses entered the midst of the cloud as he went up to the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And what I find so intriguing, and we're going to talk about the holiness of God, but it's like those who were closest to him revere his holiness the most. I mean, you will not find a more humble man in all of Scripture than Moses, and yet he's encountered him the closest. And I also thought about Revelation chapter 1 when John, who was his best friend, while he was on earth, I mean, they had everything together, and yet when he sees him, he fell at his feet as though dead. I mean, they revere the holiness of God. Those who know him more intimately revere his holiness more. They don't take him lightly, which I thought was interesting to think about that.
I just think that's something that we can't conceive in our minds. And so when we're confronted with his holiness, there's just no way that we can comprehend it.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to have Aaron building a golden calf. We're going to have a Nadab and Abihu just offering strange fire, trying to approach him in a way that he didn't prescribe. I mean, just the casualness that they feel toward God is so different than Moses, and like we see in the New Testament, John.
I
Just
think they'd be afraid.
I know. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting.
Maybe they thought they were on the end because they got to see.
Maybe. Yeah, I took it for granted rather than
Right.
right. Yeah.
But isn't that how it is today? The people who are closest to the Lord
Yes.
are the most humble people.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
You really know and even today, the people that I know that I feel like are truly close to the Lord, they're humble people,
Right, and
realizing their inadequacy.
And you continue to grow in your your humility.
Right.
Right. You just continue to go. The more you draw near, the more humble. Yeah, I think that's a sign of spiritual growth is when you just feel God just chiseling away at our pride and self. So, yeah. Okay, we're going to stop off in Jeremiah on our way to the New Testament, Jeremiah 31. 31. Jeremiah 31.
Just now.
Oh.
Just now. We're going there right now.
Jeremiah 31:31. Okay, it says, "Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it. And I will be their God, and they will be my people." And again, this is so interesting. Well, let me read 34. "And they shall not teach again each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more." So we have, I wanted to read this in Jeremiah, and this whole passage is quoted in Hebrews 8. It's a very long passage, and it's quoted in its entirety in Hebrews 8. But I want you to see, they understood that there was a new covenant coming. They understood that it was going to replace the covenant at Sinai. They understood that. They knew that. They were longing for that. And I want to point out again, I know we've said it before, but and he says, "I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it." So on Mount Sinai, he's writing it on tablets of stone, and then he's going to give it to Moses. Here, he says it's going to be, we're, like, everything about Mount Sinai was external. It was, it was written externally, it was performed externally, all the rituals that they did, and this is so internal. He's putting his word on their heart. He's changing our heart. He's changing our desires. And then he says, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. This is not a command. This is a promise. It's not a command. It's not you must do this. It's he's doing it. It's a promise of what he's going to do in us. He's going to make us his people. We don't have to do anything to become his people. He's making us his people. It is a promise, not a command.
Does this not testify to people having an innate knowledge of God as well, or no?
I don't know if this passage does, but he does address that in Romans chapter 1. Absolutely.
But it sounds kind of like it to me. I don't know.
Well, of course, he's talking about Israel, and he's talking about when he's going to save them. And they're going to be so, like, when you become his people, you know him. I think that's what he's...
Okay.
When you become... of course, we're growing in our knowledge of him, but even if we don't have all the scriptures and theology in our head, everything about you knows that's not right, or something's not right. You may not be able to put a verse to it, but I think that I don't know. I think that, like, the Holy Spirit in us might throw up a red flag, even if we don't have the verse to back it at that time. I think we know. And just a promise that we can know him. I just think about, this is eternal life that you can know him. Like, he's given us his word. We can know him through his word. That's a promise. Okay, any other thoughts or questions? So just know that Israel knew this. They had this. It's quoted in Hebrews. They knew a new covenant was coming. They knew it was coming. So then we go to Luke. Let's go to Luke 22. And Luke 22 is the Lord's Supper. This is just before his crucifixion. He's having a meal with his disciples. And of course, they take the bread, they give thanks. He says, "This is my body." And then in verse 20, he says, "And in the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." I don't know if they choked on the wine at that point, or when they heard this is the new covenant, they would have immediately remembered Jeremiah's prophecy. There's a new covenant coming. And I mean, the promise of the new covenant would have been so, I don't know. You know, the ritual, and then this promise that he's going to put their word in their heart. It's not external. Now it's internal, changing from the inside out, and forgiving their sins, forgiving their iniquities. When they heard these words, this is the blood, the new covenant, and then he says, in my blood. I mean, this is a sealed. So every time we take the Lord's Supper, we're saying we agree to the terms of this covenant. Whosoever believes in him, I mean, we're agreeing to that. We're entering into, well, I guess the first time you enter into the covenant, that kind of ratifies the covenant, and then every time after, it's a remembrance, reminding us of the covenant. And I was thinking, of course, the most binding covenant we know is marriage. And it's like God took these people, Israel, out, set them apart from all the other nations, the same way a husband would, you have a bride and you set her apart from all the other women. You set them apart. And there's a covenant relationship. And so anyway, then here in the New Testament, it's for Gentiles too. It's for whosoever will believe in him. So I just think when they heard that, I don't know if they, like I said, if they choked on their wine then, or if it didn't hit them. Till later reflecting, he said, this is the blood of the new covenant, which is in his blood. It's very binding. And so much better.
It might have been more meaningful a few days later.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they had been aching for this for so long. And I do think even around the time of Christ, I think they knew the time was near, and they were so ready for a new covenant. Just the weariness of the old, and I think they were so ready. But you're right. And that's when we get to Hebrews. And then you realize they really understood by the time we get here. So Hebrews 9. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole chapter because I want you to see where we're going. And like I said, when we come back in the fall and we start the tabernacle, this is going to be our commentary. I mean, he addresses the role of the high priest, and then here we're going to see the tabernacle, everything. It's so good. Okay, so I'm going to read Hebrews. I'm going to begin at chapter 9, verse 1. Now, even the first covenant, because he's just quoted that whole passage in Jeremiah. I'll read 8:13. When he said a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. But whatever is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to disappear. And he quotes that whole passage in Jeremiah. Now, even the first covenant had regulations of divine worship, and again, that term worship, just notice how it's used, and the earthly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle prepared, the outer one, in which were the lampstand, the table, and the sacred bread, that is called the holy place. And behind the second veil, there was a tabernacle, which is called the Holy of Holies, having a golden altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna, and Aaron's rod, which budded, and the tables of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. But of these things we cannot speak in detail. Now, when these things have been thus prepared, the priests are continually entering the outer tabernacle, performing the divine worship. But into the second, only the high priest enters once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. The Holy Spirit is signifying this, that the way into the holy place has not yet been disclosed while the outer tabernacle is still standing, which is a symbol for the present time. Accordingly, both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make the worshiper perfect in conscience, since they relate only to food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until a time of reformation. But when Christ appeared as high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood. He entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. And for this reason he is the mediator of a new covenant, in order that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. For where a covenant is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. For a covenant is valid only when men are dead, for it is never in force while the one who made it lives. Therefore, even the first covenant was not inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people, according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you." And in the same way he sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with the blood. And according to the law, one may almost say, all things are cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor was it that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with blood, not with his own. Otherwise he would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now once, at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And inasmuch as it is appointed for man to die once, and after this comes judgment, so Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time for salvation, without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. Okay. So, let's see. So he gives the layout of the earthly tabernacle. And when we actually get into Exodus and start building it, you're going to see it is a picture of heaven. Every time, and when we get into Revelation, you see it. When we get to glimpse into heaven, about every other chapter, you get to see. You get to see this. So what we have on earth is just that's why he says so many times, make it exactly like I showed you, exactly according to the plans, exactly. And that's why it's just a replica of what heaven actually looks like. So it's really going to be fascinating. And then in beginning of verse 6, he says, now these things have been thus prepared. The priests are continually entering the outer tabernacle, performing the divine worship. And again, he's talking about what the priests do. That's what's considered worship. But they're continually off. And we talked about last week, every time they gather, it starts with a sin offering. I mean, you cannot even begin the worship until there's been an admission of sin by the offering of a sin sacrifice. And so, but notice it's continual, performing the divine worship. And again, as God's prescribed, we don't get to pick our own. But into the second, only the high priest enters once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself first, which we saw that on the Day of Atonement. They have to atone for their own sins and then for the sins of the people. But I think two things stand out. It was continual, like the work is never done, and there's barriers. And I think it shows, it's showing a lot of like barriers. They can only go in here and only once a year. And then it does say again, which we talked about too, for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. And then verse 8, the Holy Spirit is signifying this, that the way into the holy place has not yet been disclosed while the outer tabernacle is still standing, which is a symbol for the present time. And so what he's saying is this whole tabernacle, this whole sacrificial system, it was pointing us to Christ. For this time right here when Christ came and died, it was all pointing toward that. And we talked about the mundane, tedious details and burdensome, and they just longed to be released from that. And then now that time has come.
Really makes you think about how, the significance of the veil being torn.
Yes, okay,
You know.
yes. And that's, I wanted to say that. I mean, so it's in Matthew 27, I think 51. The veil is ripped from top to bottom. But
Bottom to top, right?
no, I think it was top to bottom.
Top to bottom.
Showing that God-
That's right. I'm sorry.
Showing that God
I'm sorry.
himself, no one else
Yes,
could have
yes,
done it.
Of course.
So I think sometimes we hear that and we've taken that to mean, let's just say what it doesn't mean. We're not stripping God of his holiness and making him
Right.
so approachable, like bringing him down to man, stripping him of his holiness, and you can just approach. But what it is doing is it's doing away with the outer tabernacle. We no longer need someone to enter annually. Christ himself entered. I mean, he's still very holy, and it's still only his way on his terms, the way he's prescribed. But Jesus fulfilled that. You don't need a priest to go year after year after year. That system, and I mean, all of this, I just want you to know, it wasn't like out of the blue. God says, oh, now we have a new covenant. That would have raised a red flag for everyone. But he had already told them to look for this, that it was coming. And so this is the fulfillment. But yes, it does away with the whole earthly.
Well, the priesthood, we have a high priest, and it's Jesus.
Yes.
And that's it.
But you still only approach through the high priest.
Yes.
We can't.
And we couldn't go into God's
No,
presence.
we
We couldn't even pray if it wasn't
No,
for Jesus.
exactly. Yes. And so I think sometimes with that being split, it's been interpreted that anyone can approach him anytime, just make him casual and bring him down to man. And I want you to see he's still very holy, and we still require a high priest. It's just Jesus fulfilled that.
And it says in Hebrews 2 that the veil is his flesh. So like
Yes.
his flesh was ripped, just like the animal.
Yes.
So when we enter that covenant with him, we are walking through the pieces of the animal, but the
Yes.
animal's Christ. So we're
That's
walking
so
through it.
good. Yes.
It's really amazing.
It's amazing. Yes. And so when we will do this right on top of Exodus. We will stay them simultaneously. Because it shows you why that system was in place and why it's in place no more. It's no longer needed. And I also wanted you to see, so this was God himself, and he told that there was going to be a new covenant. So when that Hebrew roots movement, when they go back under that, do you see how terrible that is? And it's just saying that Christ is not the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Okay. Okay, where were we? Okay, so that was the other thing. You know how they did it continually? Like, there were no recliners in the temple, tabernacle, at all. Because their work was never done. And it's so significant that Christ is seated. And it talks about, when we talk about it, he's seated. He went through and he's seated at the right hand of God. His work was done. It's not a continual. It worked. It's done. Okay. Yes, it's very significant that he was seated because the priest never sat. Ever. Because their work was never done. There was always so much. Okay. Okay, and we talked about that. It was a symbol for the present time. So it was pointing to this. It was pointing to Christ. And again, he says the gifts and sacrifices are offered which cannot make the worshiper perfect in conscience. So it was, it didn't make your conscience, it wasn't an inside out. It was just external. Everything about it was external. And this kind of forgiveness is from the inside out. And it's a clean conscience before God. So they relate to food and verse.
What a blessing.
I know.
You know, and we really compare where we are to what they had to do.
I know. Yeah, and he says in verse 10 that these regulations were imposed until a time of reformation. And I just want you to know Israel knew that. Like this thing, God's not just springing something new on them. I mean, he's told them this was coming. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands. So obviously he's not talking about the earthly, he's talking about the heavenly. And that's why like when he did that, it did away with the need for the earthly. Just totally did away with the need for it. And of course, and then verse 12, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. I mean, the other, it didn't work. That's why they had to do it over and over and over and over, and you know, all the time sin offerings, once a year, the atonement. It was just a continual, because it never, but this is a once for all. Just that's it. That did it. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God. And this is so interesting. Of course, we just came off of Passover, and we've talked about how each family would slaughter a Passover lamb. And I mean, this isn't original to me, someone else said it, but not one of those lambs ever said, pick me, I'll die for you, pick me, I want to be your Passover lamb. They didn't volunteer. They were taken. They didn't volunteer. And Christ himself volunteered, willingly laid down his life. So he, through the eternal Spirit, offered himself without blemish to God. Cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. And I think here when it's talking about the dead works, it's just a sacrificial system that didn't really cleanse your conscience. I mean, it did what you needed to do, but that clean, I don't know, that when you've been forgiven and you're clean, those sacrifices couldn't do that. Okay. And for this reason, he is the mediator of a new covenant, in order that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. For where a covenant is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. For a covenant is valid only when men are dead, for it is never in force while the one who made it lives. And this, I don't know what the other translations, I didn't read them, but when I was reading about this, it's like when the one who made it, it would be the ratifier. So that animal died representing, I guess, the ratifier, whatever. And this is just saying, so here Jesus himself, not only, I mean, he ratifies the covenant in his own blood. He doesn't have a representative animal die in his place. He died and ratified the covenant himself in his own blood. And we've seen that no covenant was ever ratified without blood.
It had to cost you something.
Yes.
To pay for that.
That's good.
That's where it costs
Yes.
Jesus even more.
Yes, that's good. Yes. Yeah, because he says in 18, for even the first covenant was not inaugurated without blood. And when he keeps referring to the first covenant and the new covenant, it's just the one at Mount Sinai versus the one on Mount Calvary, if you will. Yeah. So then in verse 19 we get a little more detail. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you. And in the same way, he sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with the blood. So we're going to see when they build it, that's how they're going to, cleanse it. And then we saw it too on the Day of Atonement. You had to offer sacrifices and cleanse because of the sins of the people that had defiled it. And which I'm glad we talked about that recently.
And the book is talking about the scriptures?
Yes, that Moses had written down,
Okay, that's
the law, right. So according to the law, one may almost say, all things are cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. In which the Lord said, and there's a giving of a life. Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. So again, what we're going to build this tabernacle is a copy of everything in heaven. We're going to see the altar, we're going to see the incense, we're going to see cherubim, we're going to see mercy seat, cherubim, we'll see it all. And it's just so amazing that this is such a perfect... And then 24, for Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. So again, serving as our high priest, we still only approach God through a high priest still. So all of that, they did this all the time. It would have been so ingrained in them. And so as we study, it's just a great picture of all that Christ has done. We've seen him in every sacrifice. We've seen him in every feast. We're seeing him in the role of the high priest. It just, all of that pictures what he's done for us. Okay, nor was it that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with blood, not his own. Otherwise, he would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So, he's the atonement, he's the sin offering, he's the fellowship offering, he's the high priest, he's just, And as much as it was appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment, which is why we know that there's no reincarnation. You die once, then you face judgment. So Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time for salvation, without reference to sin, to those who eagerly await him. So the first time he came, as our high priest, as our Passover lamb, as our, the second time he comes, he's coming as Savior, King, to redeem his people. And if you've not accepted him as your sacrifice for your sin, then when he comes again, it's too late. Because the next time he's only coming for those, to save those who are in him. And we talked about this, we have to come to him in faith. It means we have to read it, we have to believe this is so true, and we have to believe it. But once you see it, it's too late to accept it by faith. So you can't say when he comes again, oh, okay, oh yeah, you really are God, I believe. It's too late. We have to come based on his word, believing his word, knowing that it's true.
I think it was true even back in their time, because all the elders saw, the presence of God, but yet they still didn't believe because of the golden calf that they had. So it's more than just seeing. Now it's and then.
It's so, guys, and there's a verse that said, faith does not come by seeing, but by hearing, and hearing by the word. Mm-hmm. So it's hearing and believing. Mm-hmm. It's not by sight.
And there's the verse in, is it James, where even the devils believe,
and tremble.
And tremble.
And tremble.
But it doesn't mean that they're going to be there.
No.
It still takes that faith.
Yes, and that faith to hear his word and to believe it is a gift. And if you've heard and you believed, it's a gift from God. We cannot will ourselves or our kids or, I mean, we're helpless to rebirth ourselves or to rebirth anyone else. It is a divine gift.
So does, well, I might really open the can of worms here. So does that indicate a predestined life? I mean, it says all, you know, I'm just wondering.
I mean, I just, when you read the New Testament, just notice all the verses. He has to call us first.
Oh,
No
right.
one comes to the Father, no one comes to the Son unless the Father calls him. We have to be called first. We absolutely have to be called first. We cannot come to him unless he calls us.
But is everyone not called? Okay, that's the $10 question today.
Well, I think everybody's called, but he saw time in its eternity before it was ever written or ever done anything. So, being who he is, he knew what our answer was going to be.
Right, I don't
Way
doubt that
before.
at all. But I just,
Well-
I mean, because it sounds, and I mean, you know, I don't know, but it sounds to me a lot like that.
Yeah. I mean, like Ephesians 1, I mean, it's just, you're
And
set
like
apart,
a
you're
new
called.
Baptist, I don't know that
But-
I'm supposed to believe it. Really.
Well,
No.
but that's the thing. I mean, you're right. It's whoever believes in him, and that means whoever believes in him. But then we cannot believe in him unless he enables us to
Right.
believe in him. We just can't. We cannot. I mean, he has to call us first. We cannot acknowledge our sin. We will. And just like, I mean, we can just go through Paul. Paul wasn't on the road to pick me, pick me. No, he was running to persecute. You know, Moses didn't pick himself. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. I mean, but so whoever believes in him, absolutely, but we cannot believe in him unless he calls us.
I think when it comes down to our choice, it's